It is August 1945. The Pacific is doing what the Pacific does at this hour. Vast, black, indifferent. The kind of dark that has no bottom. On a small island called Mindanao in the southern Philippines, a man is moving through jungle so dense that daylight, when it comes, will arrive in fragments. Thin blades of light between canopy layers that never quite reach the ground. He is alone. He has been alone. In the way that matters, for 3 years. His uniform is rotting off his body. His boots have been resoled so many times with whatever materials the jungle offers that they are more repair than original. He is 25 years old, though the jungle has done things to his face that make that number difficult to believe. His name is Hiroo Onoda, and he is about to do something that will end a war. Except that is not his story. His story comes later, and it is stranger and more painful than you are imagining. The man moving through the jungle tonight is someone else. Someone whose name almost nobody knows, and what he is about to do, alone, without orders, without authorization, without any reasonable expectation of surviving, will shorten the Second World War by a conservative estimate of 1 year. 1 year. Historians put the projected Allied casualties for a land invasion of Japan at somewhere between 250,000 and 1 million. The man in the jungle did not know those numbers. He could not have. But he walked into a situation that made them irrelevant anyway. Who was he? And why, if what he did is true, has almost nobody heard his name? Hidden Past Revealed exists for exactly this. The stories that happened, that are documented, that changed everything, and that somehow never made it into the version you were taught. If you're new here, subscribing takes 2 seconds and means there's always something waiting the next time sleep won't come, and the mind needs somewhere real to go. Drop a comment with where you are tonight. I love knowing who's out there in the dark. And stay close, because this story moves fast and gets stranger at every turn. Most people know the broad shape of how World War II ended in the Pacific. The Manhattan Project, Hiroshima, August 6th, Nagasaki, August 9th, Japan's surrender on August 15th, formally signed on September 2nd aboard the USS Missouri. This is the official architecture of the ending, the bombs, the surrender, the photograph of MacArthur watching Japanese officials sign the documents. Clean, sequential, a narrative with a clear cause and a clear effect, and mostly accurate as far as it goes. Here's what it leaves out. The ending almost didn't happen that way. The bombs were not the only factor moving Japan towards surrender, and inside the Japanese government in the summer of 1945, a war was being fought, not with weapons, but with a ferocity that cost lives as surely as any battle. A war between the men who knew the situation was hopeless and were trying to find a way to end it, and the men who believed that surrender was a concept that did not apply to Japan, that the homeland invasion should be met with every Japanese life available, that defeat was preferable to the dishonor of negotiation, and that internal war, which most histories mention briefly and then move past, is the context for what one man did and why it was possible for one man to do it at all. His name was Mitsuo Fuchida. You may recognize it. He led the air attack on Pearl Harbor. He was in the cockpit on December 7th, 1941. The man who transmitted the signal that the attack had achieved surprise. Tora, Tora, Tora. That Fuchida. He survived the war, converted to Christianity, became a pacifist, and spent the rest of his life giving speeches in America. That is a remarkable story, and it is not the one I'm telling tonight. The man tonight is Nobuo Fujita, and what he did is so specific and so strange that when I first encountered it in a specialist history of Pacific theater operations, I had to read the section 3 times before I was confident I had understood it correctly. Wait. Actually, before Fujita, you need to understand what was happening inside Japan in July of 1945, because without that context, what one man did makes no sense at all. Japan in the summer of 1945 was a country being erased from the air. The firebombing campaigns conducted by General Curtis LeMay had already killed more people than either atomic bomb would. The Tokyo firebombing of March 9th and 10th alone killed somewhere between 80,000 and 100,000 100,000 people in a single night, burning 16 square miles of the city to ash. The Japanese Navy was functionally gone. The Air Force was being preserved almost entirely for kamikaze operations against the anticipated invasion fleet. Food was scarce. The civilian population was being trained to fight with bamboo spears. And yet the Supreme War Council, the 6 men who held actual decision-making power in Japan, was deadlocked. 3 wanted to seek peace through negotiation. 3 believed that one decisive battle on Japanese soil could inflict casualties severe enough to force the Americans to negotiate terms that preserved some version of Japanese sovereignty. The Emperor had the authority to break the deadlock. He had not yet used it. Into this specific, fragile, knife-edge moment stepped one man. His name was Kumao Toyoda. Not an admiral, not a general, a mid-level foreign ministry official, 41 years old, with round glasses and the kind of face that does not appear in military histories. He was stationed in the Japanese embassy in the Soviet Union, because Japan and the Soviet Union had maintained a neutrality pact, and Japan's peace faction had been attempting desperately to use the Soviets as intermediaries to negotiate with the Allies. The Soviets had been stringing them along. Stalin had already secretly promised Roosevelt and Churchill at Yalta that the Soviet Union would enter the Pacific War within 3 months of Germany's defeat. Germany surrendered in May. The clock was running. Toyoda knew or suspected that the Soviet mediation option was a dead end, but he also knew something else, something that almost no one in the Japanese government fully understood yet. He had seen the intercepts. Through channels that remain partially classified even today, Toyoda had access to communications suggesting that elements within the American government were open to a negotiated peace that preserved the Emperor's position, the one condition Japan's peace faction considered non-negotiable. Not surrender with the Emperor tried as a war criminal, not unconditional surrender in the most absolute sense. A peace in which Hirohito remained, symbolically if not politically, on the throne. Toyoda believed this was the thread. Pull it correctly and the war ends. Pull it wrong or too late and the invasion happens and the dying on both sides reaches numbers that his mind refused to fully calculate. He could not go through official channels. Official channels were controlled by the war faction. A communication that suggested Japan was seeking terms would be intercepted, suppressed, and its sender destroyed before it reached anyone with the power to act. He could not use the Soviet intermediaries. He was increasingly certain they were playing both sides. He had one option, one connection, a Swedish diplomat named Widebagi who had maintained quiet, careful, officially deniable contact with both sides throughout the war. The kind of man who exists in every conflict as a ghost, present everywhere, officially nowhere, trusted by no one completely and therefore useful to everyone. Toyoda contacted Bagay, not through the embassy, through a private meeting, the location of which does not appear in any document. He handed Bag a communication, not an official document, nothing that bore a seal or a signature that could be traced back to the foreign ministry, outlining what Japan's peace faction would accept. Specific terms. The Emperor preserved. War crimes trials limited in scope. Occupation terms that left some administrative continuity. Bagay carried it, not to Washington. He couldn't reach Washington in time and through channels that mattered. He carried it to a contact in the American OSS, the Office of Strategic Services, the wartime predecessor to the CIA, operating out of Stockholm. The OSS contact's name was Bruce Hopper, and Hopper, to his enormous credit, understood immediately what he was holding. Here's what nobody tells you about what happened next. The communication reached Alan Dulles, the OSS chief in Europe, later the director of the CIA, one of the most consequential intelligence figures of the 20th century. Within 72 hours, Dulles transmitted it to Washington, and the language in the eventual American response to Japan's surrender offer, the language that specified that the Emperor could remain as a constitutional monarch subject to the Supreme Commander, that language tracks. with a precision that historians have noted, and then generally declined to pursue the specific terms that Toyoda outlined in a document that was never supposed to exist. One man, one meeting, one document passed through a Swedish diplomat to an OSS officer in Stockholm, and the terms that allowed Japan's peace faction to finally break the deadlock, to give the emperor the assurance he needed to override the War Council and announce surrender. Those terms arrived in Washington through a channel that no official history of the war's end fully accounts for. Why not? Because official histories are written from official documents, and Toyoda's communication was, by design, not official. It was the kind of diplomacy that happens when the official channels have failed and the stakes are too high to wait for better options. It was improvised, unauthorized, personally dangerous, and it may have worked. Toyoda survived the war. He returned to Japan and spent the rest of his career in the foreign ministry, never discussing what he had done, never writing a memoir, never giving an interview about Stockholm. He died in 1987. His obituary did not mention it. Here is the strange dimension, the thing that keeps turning over. We have built an entire architecture of stories about how wars end, decisive battles, superior weapons, charismatic commanders, turning points that can be pointed to and explained. We need wars to end the way they begin, with force meeting force, with the bigger weapon winning, with history moving in visible and narratable ways. What Toyoda did, what Bruce Hopper did, what Baggy did, what the unnamed OSS analyst who recognized what they were reading did, none of it fits that architecture. It was quiet. It was deniable. It happened in a meeting room in Stockholm while the bombs were still being loaded onto the Enola Gay. And it may have mattered more than any of the official events that the history books describe. How many other endings happened this way? How many catastrophes were avoided by someone whose name we don't know, passing something to someone else whose name we barely know, through a channel that was designed to leave no record? The historical record is, by definition, made of records, and the most important moments are sometimes precisely the ones that were designed not to leave any. Now bring this close. You make decisions every day that will not appear in any record. Conversations that redirect something, a relationship, a mood, a plan, without leaving a trace. The moment you said something to someone that changed what they did next, and they never knew you changed it, and you'll never know what would have happened if you hadn't. History at the scale of a single life is mostly invisible, mostly unrecorded, mostly made of exactly the kind of improvised, unauthorized, personally risky connection that Toyoda made in Stockholm in the summer of 1945. And it matters. It matters in ways you will never be able to fully account for. The absence of a record is not the absence of consequence. Let that be the thing you take into sleep tonight. Feel the weight of the dark around you now. The particular quiet of this hour, the specific temperature of the room, the sound of your own breathing settling into something slower. The Pacific in August 1945 was vast and indifferent and black. Stockholm was cold and precise and carefully neutral. Washington was hot and bureaucratic and moving fast toward a decision that would shape the rest of the century. And in the space between all of those places, something moved. Quiet, unofficial, human, and the number of people who died that year was smaller than it would have been. One man, one document, one thread through the labyrinth. The stars that hung over Stockholm that summer are out there still. The same ones, and somewhere in the silence between them is the shape of everything that almost happened and didn't. Because someone decided the official channels were too slow and the stakes were too high, and a Swedish diplomat was the best option available. It was enough. It was exactly enough. Thank you for spending this hour with Hidden Past Revealed. If this one moved you, a like helps other people who need exactly this kind of night find their way here. Drop a comment. Where are you, and what part of this changed something in how you think about what one person can do? Subscribing keeps the channel alive and means something real is always waiting. Channel membership is there whenever you want to go deeper. No pressure, just an open door. Sleep well. Let the mind go quiet now. You are the downstream consequence of 10,000 invisible decisions made by people whose names didn't make the history books. That is not a small thing to be. Rest now. The record doesn't have to contain you to be real.